Fake business, real business, what does that look like to you?
9 out of 10 of the things that you're going to see online are just flat out bullshit. They monetize their ability to be charismatic, and then they sort of convince those people that they know how to do business. I think it's fraudulent.
You're building a business in this space. Tell us about that business and how you're approaching it. What's different about it? What is the game behind the game for you that's driven your success in business? Are you waking up at 4 a.m. and cold plunging and running 8 miles and grinding it out and hustling and beating yourself all day? What is the fundamental process that really allows you to gain the success you've had in business?
I'm an advisor to Capital One, and I was at every year they have an annual automotive startup accelerator that they sponsor. So they choose 12 companies. One of the questions that they asked, or that one of the founders asked, is what are the qualities that you see in successful entrepreneurs? It's not the education, it's not the experience, it's not the most strategic thinker, it's none of those qualities. It's the ones that are the most resilient, because I believe that most businesses can will their way to a successful outcome if they're just around long enough, right? Specifically, like the world I play in is venture-backed technology companies. Either they're going to be really big or they're going to die.
Yeah, survival is fundamentally
Yeah.
The most important thing.
Right.
world,
Very different
in
than
that
like
world.
sort of building a profitable business, right?
Sure. Which is what I like to do, by the way.
For sure. And which I have, by the way, less experience doing, right? I've only done like we grow and scale at all costs, and either it's really big or it's really
you got to explain that to me someday. I'm still confused about it.
Well, the model is proven to not work in real economic environments like we're in right now, right? So when capital markets are frothy and doing well, and VCs don't know where to park their money, these models can work. But in normal markets like we're in today, not so much, right?
It's amazing how powerful profitability is as a form of insurance.
Oh, dude.
Right? I mean, so the best insurance you can ever have in a business is to be profitable.
Yeah.
A lot of other high-risk games you could play to build revenue. So
yeah,
you're involved in these, fast growth technology businesses. What's driving you? What are you passionate about in those businesses? How are you operating? We have a lot of people that obviously, listen to this conversation and they're like, hey, give me like some tactical things that allow you to go just crush it.
For me, the key to scaling any business successfully is people. Not just the employees that you hire, by the way, but it's the relationships that you make outside of the company that are required, I think, to get any business to where you want to go, right? So you think about the role of a CEO, and I think about it this way. The CEO is like a center of a wheel of important people or constituents, if you will. And these could be investors, advisors, board of directors, customers, partners, employees, your executive team, the public eye, the PR, right? It's like there's like 10 or 12 really important groups of people that as the CEO, you have to appease.
That's right.
And so if you are not able to create deep connections with these cohorts of people, right? Employees probably being the main one, number one, then it's really hard to get business to where you want to go. I've seen entire businesses change because of one hire. I've seen entire businesses change because of one strategic partnership. I've seen entire businesses change because of one investor.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's like, I'm not saying you have to know everybody or have thousands of people around you to will a business to success, but it's like, you have to have the right people, and you have to be able to maintain really strong relationships with these people for a long period of time and have the right intentions. And I think the relationships with people, those constituents I talked about, is for sure number one. And it's, again, I don't consider myself the smartest guy. I'm not the most technical. I build software businesses, but I'm not the most technical founder. But it's the ability to connect with people and really genuinely care about these people. And that I think has made me successful.
So you started out in the automotive industry,
Yeah,
which is kind of fun because I did as well. What caused you to think about starting a business in the automotive industry?
Yeah.
I'm guessing, were you working at a car dealership?
I was flipping cars in college.
You're flipping cars.
Yeah.
What was the first car you ever flipped?
It was a 1993 Subaru Outback.
That's a very interesting vehicle.
Yep.
And so you bought this car?
Yep.
What'd you pay for it?
2,300,
What'd you sell it for?
3,500.
How did you sell it?
I was living in Utah at the time, and Utah, a lot of people use today Facebook Marketplace, which didn't exist back then, or Craigslist. Utah has a site called ksl.com, which is their main classified where the majority of transactions happen.
Is that unique to
Utah?
Okay.
Yeah, but 90% or more of peer-to-peer transactions happen on KSL's marketplace.
Who owns that?
It's owned by Deseret Management Corporation, who owns Deseret Digital Media, a bunch of actually church-owned properties.
I kind of gathered that.
Yeah. Yeah, so I bought my first car, sold it, turned around, bought another one, sold it. Next thing you know, in a period of 2 years, I'd bought and sold about 200 cars. So I was buying and selling multiple cars a week.
So you're just curbstoning them is what they call it the industry. You're doing it from your home and just flipping cars, or did you have a lot and a recon department, or what was going on?
So my model was this. My model was I would scan KSL all day long. I was fairly technical. Like I did software development courses in high school. Me and a friend built an app that would scan KSL's site real time. The moment cars were listed that matched our criteria, it would text our phone with a link to the car. I'd immediately call them. I'd say, I'll be there in 10 minutes. I'd show up. I'd pay cash. I was trying to identify cars that were like dirty, that, would be a turnoff to a lot of people if they saw them, that I knew I could take in, clean up, maybe replace the tires, maybe do the oil, maybe replace the windshield wipers.
Were you doing the reconditioning of these vehicles yourself?
Yeah. But it was like, I had a rinky-dink shop that I partnered with that gave me a shop rate. And I would never do more than like 200 to 300 of recon on these cars. And my profit objective was $1,000 a car, regardless of if I paid $2,000 or $10,000. So yeah, I developed this software. I ended up utilizing that technology I licensed it to about 25 car dealerships. So car dealers that wanted to buy more private party vehicles.
So franchise car dealerships or buy here, pay here?
Small Tom, Dick, and Harry, buy here, pay here lots.
All right.
And they were trying to get an edge, and we had created a little bit better efficiency in sourcing these cars. And so one of the dealers that I licensed that software to, I became an investor in. So I had made like, I don't know, 250, 300,000.
So you're a car dealer now?
Yeah. So at 22, I had made a bunch of cash buying and selling cars. Didn't know how to deploy it.
Were you paying taxes on that cash?
I mean, who's asking?
Yeah, I'm just curious, but yeah, keep going.
Not paying taxes. By the way, I had bought and sold, funny story, I had bought and sold about 20 cars. And I walk into the DMV one day and this nice old lady's like, "Hey again, Tyler, good to see you." Like first name basis. I'm like, "Hey, Cheryl," like, she's like, "So are you, according to my record, like we don't have your dealer license on file. Do you have that?" And I'm like, "What do you mean? I don't know what you mean." She's like, "Are you a dealer?" I'm like, "No." She's like, "Are you a wholesaler?" I'm like, "No." She's like, "Do you have any?" I'm like, "No." Like I had no idea. Like this went over my head, right? And she's like, in the state of Utah, legally, you can only buy and sell. You can only register 3 cars into your name in a calendar year. And according to my records, you've done like 20. I'm like, okay, what do we do? Like, do I need to pay a fine or something? And, at this point, I'm like balling. I have cash. I'm like, I'll just pay this lady off. She's like, "This is a Class B misdemeanor. I'm supposed to report you to the police, and you're of age. Like, you'll go to jail for this."
That's awesome.
And I'm like, whoa, this is a big deal. Right?
Yeah.
So she said, "Listen," I literally started crying. I'm like 21-year-old kid.
With a load of cash.
Okay. And
now, were you like authentically crying, or was this like a staged cry?
No, I was like actually scared.
You were scared. You were going to jail.
I was like, dude, I'm going to go to jail.
Yeah.
Like I'm a kid. And genuinely, I had no idea about these rules. She goes, "Look, I'm not going to report you, but I flagged you in the system. Like you can't do this anymore. You got to get a dealer license." So she gave me this packet, and I started reading through this packet. Realized I didn't want to be a dealer, so I hung it up. Went back to school, and 3 days go by, and I'm like, dude, I miss the rush of like finding the deal and buying and selling and making money. So I went and knocked on a bunch of dealerships' doors to see if one of them would let me use their license. And this one dealer I found, he's like, "Yeah, dude, you can use my license. It's $100 a car. You can do as many as you want." So now I had to start registering them through a dealer, which meant sales tax. And registration and the whole deal. And long story short, ended up developing software, bought and sold a couple hundred cars, got really good at sourcing these vehicles. One of my dealers was a salvage rebuilt lot. He couldn't get bank financing, floor plan financing to buy cars. And I had all this money and I said, hey, I'll give you a loan, a couple $100,000. And
So you're floor planning cars.
so now I'm floor planning cars at 22 for a buy here, pay here, salvage lot.
Were you giving this guy a fair interest rate?
I charged him 10% a month on my money.
That's a pretty good IRR. That's a pretty good IRR. And it was cash.
It was cash. And by the way, I didn't know if that was good deal, bad deal. I was so naive.
Yeah, it was a good deal, by the way.
Yeah, I know now, right? But yeah, he paid, his business did really well. We were able to increase his lot from 25 vehicles to 50, overnight.
Yeah.
And he was making $4 or $5 profit on these cars every deal. And by the way, spending $4,000 on them, right? So he's making 100% profit margin on these deals. And so that process led me to, I would see every car that we bought and sold. So every car that he used my money to floor, I would get a record of it. And then I would see when it sold and how much profit we made. And sometimes we'd lose money on a deal. And I'd say, hey, Caesar, what happened here? And he'd be like, oh, well, it was a white Jeep. And I thought white Jeeps, I bought one 2 weeks ago and I made $4,000. So I figured I'll buy another one. And I'm like, do we have any other data around why we're buying the cars that we buy? He's like, no, I just know how to buy. Right. So I started asking dealers, what data do you use to buy and sell cars? They're like, my gut, my intuition. Right. And so the two things I learned through this process: one, dealers did not utilize data to price vehicles at all. It was all gut and intuition. Two, but there was a lot of data out there. Two, every time we bought a private party vehicle, it made more money. It was faster to frontline ready. It was cleaner. It was more unique. It checked all the boxes that buying a car from an auction did not. Yeah. These were way better cars. And so I thought, man, there's got to be a way to solve this. So I went and joined 2 early stage companies over the next 7 years. One of them we took public, a company called Domo. The second company was called Higher View, which was acquired by the Carlyle Group, a big PE. And then I launched AutoHaul, which was a car dealership. And I did that because I wanted to operate and run my own car dealer. We incubated Drivably there. And I went out to solve 2 problems. How do I utilize better data to help dealers more accurately price used cars to make more profit? And 2, how do I enable dealers to buy consumer vehicles as a sustainable source of inventory for their lot? And we did that, and the rest is history.
So your customer, were they buy here, pay here dealerships primarily and used car dealers?
At Drivably?
Yeah.
No, predominantly franchise dealers.
Okay.
So a lot of people, there's a misconception that franchise dealers don't have a used car focus, but the last 10 years especially, franchise dealers have an extremely heavy used car focus, right? So
historically, it's been the most powerful profit center that they have. Yep. There's a lot of players in that space, right? I mean, you've got Auto, you've got many other players that help dealers with understanding pricing, inventory, and buying it. So were you in a competitive marketplace when you were in the franchise realm?
Totally. Yeah. And Auto was our biggest competitor. And these guys, Dale Pollock's the founder of that's a machine.
He is a machine.
Really, really good entrepreneur. And part of Cox Automotive, which is a conglomerate that's tough to go to battle against. And so we realized that, and we also realized
what was your competitive advantage over Auto and Dale's product and, the powerhouse he had of having Cox and Manheim behind him? What did you do that allowed you to go out and compete?
Our biggest thing was we took a much more sort of data-driven approach than Auto, right? So Auto, what they did was they would aggregate a bunch of market data. So what's listed for sale currently, what's selling at the auctions, for example. And then dealers could match that data, that market data, against a vehicle to make a more informed decision, right? Which to me, that's inherently flawed because it was teaching all dealers, regardless of how big or small or what brands you have as a franchise, et cetera, that they needed the same cars for the same price and would make the same amount of profit. Mm-hmm. There was nothing specific to the dealership. So we thought that those models were inherently flawed. They weren't even models. We thought that approach was
So you'd
inherently
model
flawed.
your product for the specific dealership.
Yeah. So we built data models that would ingest historical transaction data inside of the dealership
Yeah.
to say what actually works here. If you're a Toyota dealer and next door is a Ford dealer, you don't actually need the same cars because, by the way, Toyota, you can CPO used Toyotas and get $1,000 on average more per car. By the way, Ford, the way that you sell vehicles and your sales methodology is very different than Toyota. Therefore, these will work better, right? So we took that approach. We ended up finding out that all businesses pivot a lot, right? And we ended up finding out that to go and get that data at scale was going to be expensive and time consuming, et cetera, right? So we ended up pivoting during COVID to focus on becoming a consumer vehicle acquisition company. We bought a company based out of Montreal in the middle of COVID in May of 2020 for probably several million less than we could have 6 months earlier because of the market condition. And we took a big bet. And next thing you know, COVID, we had an all-time high consumer demand for vehicles, all-time low supply of cars. And we were kind of caught in the middle of a perfect storm. Dealers desperately needed inventory. And we had a unique way to go and get it, which was from consumer driveways.
Kind of deconstruct for me. Fake business, real business. What does that look like to you?
As I started creating content a year ago, I stepped into this world that I didn't actually realize existed, which were all these people that talk about being an entrepreneur or building businesses, but that have never actually built businesses the way that I thought about building businesses my entire career, right? And it's things like they monetize their ability to be charismatic and say big words or controversial things online to build an audience. And then they sort of convince those people that they know how to do business, and they monetize that through selling courses or speaking engagements or curriculum or seminars or retreats or name the thing. And I think it's just flat out fraud. I think it's fraudulent. And just go onto TikTok or Instagram any day. And if you care about business stuff, 9 out of 10 of the things that you're going to see online are just flat out bullshit. It really bothers me as somebody who's like spent a decade of their life, they're basically their entire career building real companies. I understand what it takes and what it means to do that. I understand the amount of people that have to be involved to do that. I understand what's at stake when you raise money from investors, right? And you see these people talking about it, and it makes you a little bit like, it turns me off because it's just fraudulent. And you have millions of people that are subscribing to these ideas that are going to ultimately change their life. And at the end of it all, they come away with nothing. So
let's break that down.
Yeah.
So I totally understand what you're saying. We've talked about it before. We have I think a common passion around strategic, tactical, discipline, business strategy that's really happening versus building a marketing agency and a brand that's got a bunch of vapor behind it. So you said it. You dove into this space about a year ago.
Yeah.
And I'd love to hear what's your mission, what's your purpose, but you're building a business in this space, right? And this is a space that is crowded, and the space is certainly in deep need of people that can bring real information and be a guide in the marketplace. But for you, tell us about, I want to know what you're building and how is what you're doing any different than everyone else's? Because, I'm sure you're doing podcasts, you're speaking, you have content, you've got a social following. I'm sure you have way more Instagram followers than I do, but you've got it, you're doing it. So tell us about that business and how you're approaching it. What's different about it?
Sometimes I ask myself the same question. Sometimes I wake up and I go, what is this all for? I don't need to do this. Like, what is this all for? Right. But there really is this deep intrinsic motivation from me to want to actually provide value and help people. And the reason why is because I didn't feel like I had that. I felt like I had to go through the school of hard knocks, or sort of baptism by fire, if you will, which was like, just dive face first and fuck things up enough times to where eventually like I learned a thing or two and could course correct and get it right. Right. So I think a lack of having that as an entrepreneur has really motivated me to want to help people. Priority A is not monetization and making money. Okay. So priority A really is how do I help a lot of people, right? And the way that I think about this is the content on my page and what I talk to my guests about is really not about business context at all. And the content that I spend most of the time producing and caring about and talking about really comes down to the fact that all of these people, entrepreneurs, people building businesses, people in a 9 to 5, people who are unemployed,
Yep.
everybody has one thing in common. And that's that life is actually pretty tricky and it's really difficult. And the majority of people are suffering in some way, shape, or form from anxiety or depression or mental illness of some sort, or a lack of belief in themselves, or they have this inner critic. And so I spend a lot of time talking about the sort of human to human connection of like, you've got to get yourself right first before any of this is going to work anyways. And so I talk about what's required foundationally as humans to earn the right or the position to then go and be successful in business, right? So
Yeah,
I don't do a
that's
lot of the
awesome.
business context stuff. I do a lot of the, you know, how do you get better physical health and what does that do for you? Which I think is the foundation for everything that we do, is being healthy physically. It leads to better mental health, right? Which leads to better mindset, which leads to better routines and discipline, which leads to better relationships, right? So it's like this funnel. And so once you get to like, I'm going to start a business, that's where I stop and I turn it over to people like you who care a lot more about talking about those sort of things.
Yeah. So your path, the past couple of decades,
Yeah.
has been building businesses, being an entrepreneur, and it sounds like you're really building what you're doing now to have a lot of purpose behind it.
Yeah.
And that's kind of ahead of the revenue.
Mm-hmm.
But your nature is that you're wired to be able to scale and grow and
For
build
sure.
things out.
Yes.
So what does it look like? What does success look like for you in this business and what you're building around coaching and development? Because that's fair to say that's what the product is.
So there's sort of a couple of things that I do, right? I coach a handful of CEOs very one-on-one, and that's very much like let's call it 10% of my time, which is a fill your cup activity. Okay. So doing those one-on-one coaching interactions with CEOs, it fills my cup to a certain point.
Yeah.
Okay. So I enjoy doing. However, like I don't want to build a business around that. It's like I do it because I really have a passion for it and I enjoy it. And then I have a community that I'm building called Levels, which you may have seen some stuff about Levels. Levels is really the underpinnings of it is a men's coaching community to level up in the 4 disciplines of life that matter the most.
What are those?
Which for us is physical health, mental health, relationships, and money, finances. Okay. So the 4 that you could argue spirituality, you could argue a few other ones, right? The 4 that we talk about the most are those 4. For me, I spent the majority of my career really focused on one of them, and that was how do I make more money? And eventually I got to a place in my career where, well, I made more money. Okay. And so I was okay financially. I was set, if you will. But like the other 3 were not optimized. And so I was like, well, what is this all for if my relationship with my wife sucks and my kids don't know who I am and my physical health is not in a good place? And like mentally, I'm out of it and I feel depressed and anxiety, right? So like, what is this all for? And so I had to take a step back and say, to achieve fulfillment, I have to be optimized across these 4 areas that matter the most to me. Now, spirituality, obviously a 5th that I care deeply about.
It sounds like you have a deep passion around these 4 principles. And one of the things that you brought up that is just so key with me,
Yeah.
and it's funny because I remember just as a very young guy hearing money doesn't buy happiness. And, I think another way to look at that is money does not buy fulfillment.
Yeah.
Right. It doesn't buy fulfillment. It doesn't buy purpose. And we can talk more about that. But from your perspective, if you're living in this fast paced, aggressive world, and our audience, the people that are listening to us are people that want to win, they want to succeed, they want to understand the game behind the game, they want the blueprint. What does it look like to engineer a life where you can capitalize on the game of being successful, which, as we know, has a lot more to do than just with business. But what does purpose and fulfillment look like to you today? What is that? How does that manifest itself in your own being?
Let me say this. I think there's a certain financial foundation that you have to have if you really want to become fulfilled. Okay, this is going to be controversial. People are going to go, well, that's not true. Money doesn't, it's like, no, the reality is I couldn't have got to where I got to today from a fulfillment standpoint if I didn't have a certain baseline foundation of financial wealth.
Fair.
Okay. And so I always tell people, like, go kill yourself in business as much as possible to at least cover your financial needs to where you're not thinking about money as the main driver behind the decisions that you make in your life. Okay. So if you're living paycheck to paycheck, it's a lot harder to start a company, for example. It's a lot harder to make medium and long-term decisions. Typically, if you're living paycheck to paycheck, you're thinking about how do I make the next dollar, not how do I kick that down the road to make $10 in a year from now or 10 years from now, right? I think fulfillment is a word that is intentionally ambiguous. Okay. I don't actually think, if you look up the definition, I don't actually think it's the same definition that if you surveyed 100 people, they would give you. I think everybody would say something a little bit differently. Okay. The way that I think about it is think of the root of the word being fully filled. And I think about my heart. Okay. So if my heart is 100% full, therefore I am fulfilled. Okay. And I think about it in a pie. So you separate your heart into a pie and you decide what are the things, the components of this pie that would make me fulfilled. It could be happiness and joy. It could be peace. It could be healthy relationships. It could be money. It could be a healthy body. It could be a healthy mind. You choose. There could be 3, 4, 5, or 10. And then say, how do I get each of these slivers of the pie to be as optimized as possible? Right. So I think that there are an order to the progression. For example, I think having enough finances to be clear-headed about focusing on these other things is important. Having a healthy body to then have a healthy mind to be able to, again, think about and focus and be strategic about where you spend your time. I think a lot of this comes down to discipline and priorities in our life. I hear a lot of people say, well, I don't have time to go to the gym. Well, dude, here's the deal. Neither do I, but it's a priority. And so I do it.
So you talk about the heart, and I like what you said. It's kind of it's in a pie shape. It's got maybe quadrants. Your values and your beliefs need to have some alignment, I would say, in order to be able to achieve fulfillment. And you really have to work on your values and beliefs. I can tell you as you know, someone that just celebrated a birthday, is every year I think about what my values and beliefs are, right? I mean, it's kind of like, and they've changed. They've changed. There's some that have stayed very constant, but there's some that have evolved and changed. So for you, as you're working with people, as you're helping people ultimately engineer a healthy ecosystem so they have, you know, the values and beliefs that are going to drive the heart in the right way. When you think of values and beliefs, what are your values and beliefs today?
I like to think about the alignment between your public and private integrity. So I think about this concept a lot, which is the way that I behave in front of the world, in front of my wife, in front of my friends, my kids, my parents. Is that the same way that I behave in private?
Yeah.
Okay. And I think if you can get those two things perfectly aligned, first of all, like if you're a shitbag in public, then it doesn't matter, right? But if you have the right set of standards and values and beliefs in public, then can you translate that when nobody's watching? I also think about just what are my non-negotiables for my kids, right? And
what are they?
It's a work in progress, I would say, but I have a few, and these align pretty closely to the value and belief system that I'm trying to develop. And the reason it's a work in progress is because I'm going through a spiritual level set or transformation at this stage of my life. And so what I lived 30 years of my life believing to be true, I no longer believe is true. And so that's sort of rocked my foundation of values and beliefs.
Yeah. So I'm gonna derail us here real quick, right? That's intriguing. So how old are you?
I'm 33.
All right, you're 33.
Yeah.
And so the first 30 years, you had a different belief system than you do today.
Yeah.
So tell me about those first 30.
Yeah. So I grew up in the LDS church.
Okay.
The Mormon church is what a lot of people would know it by. Genuinely, I had a great upbringing. For those who know the LDS faith, they would, if you said, have you ever met somebody who's LDS? For the most part, when people talk about LDS people, they relate, they would use the following words to describe us. These are very happy people. They're very friendly. They're successful on the average. They're good-looking people. They're family-oriented, right? However, ... And genuinely, I am incredibly grateful for the time that I spent in the church. I served a mission at 19 years old.
Where'd you go?
I served in Southern California, San Bernardino, California.
How do you sign up for that? I mean, I hear about people serving for missions in the toughest places in Guatemala. You were in Southern California?
I went
Did
to
you know
SoCal.
somebody? How'd that happen?
So actually the way the selection process works is you submit your mission papers, is what it's called. So you fill out this massive packet. You submit it in.
Now, when do you do this? How old are you when you fill this thing out?
18 and a half.
So you're 18 and a half and you're filling out an application for the mission.
Now you're 17 and a half because they can go at 18 now. But when I went, it was 19.
Okay.
You fill out this application, you submit it into the church, and the church basically at random decides where you're going to go, and they send you a letter in the mail that says, Tyler, you're going to be reporting to the Missionary Training Center on this date, and you're going to Russia or China or Japan or Brazil or Europe, right? Name the place. Me, San Bernardino, California, right? And the church believes, and they teach that this is all inspired and called of God, right? Every individual missionary that goes out, it's revelation directly from God to one of the 12 apostles. The 12 apostle then makes the assignment. You go to where God wants you to go. This is the belief in the church, right? So anyways, did the whole deal, served a 2-year mission.
So God wanted you to go to Southern California.
Wanted me to go to SoCal,
Okay.
right? By the way, San Bernardino, for those who don't know, this is when I was there, top 3 homicide rate per capita in the U.S. So one of the most dangerous cities in the U.S. when I was there. Extreme poverty, extreme ghetto, tons of gang violence. I saw multiple people get killed.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but you, on your mission, you spend a lot of time outside in the streets.
Yeah.
Were you riding a bike?
Yeah. Sun up to sundown, you're on the streets, knocking doors, talking to people. It's a
true mission field.
Yeah, it's a battlefield, right? And you go back there after the mission, you're like, dude, I can't believe I was 19 years old running around on these streets because it's really bad, right? So, but you go do that, and it's a great thing. It really is. You get closer to God. You learn a ton about being disciplined and structured, right? All your friends are out partying, drinking, going to college, doing what 19 to 21-year-olds do. And you're out in a suit and tie in 110-degree weather in the summer selling Jesus door to door. I mean, that's hard, right? So you learn a lot, and you go from being a boy when you leave to being a man when you come home, for sure. You have to learn how to live with a companion the whole time. You're never alone. There's not a moment you're alone except taking a shower or taking a dump. I mean, so it's hard. You learn how to study, you learn how to clean, you have to work out every day. I mean, you don't talk to your parents or your friends for 2 years. The only time I got to talk to my mom was on Mother's Day and Christmas the whole time.
All right, let's just unpack
I'm
this.
happy
So you go on this mission,
Yeah.
you come back
Yeah.
2 years later, hug your family, tell them you love them. You're, a grown up now.
Yeah.
You've gone through these tough times. You've gotten closer to God through this process.
Yeah.
That's a rather intense season.
Mm-hmm.
What's the transition look like from spending 2 years in the mission field to now you're back into somewhat of, everyday life? What is that like? How do you remember that?
You forget how to snap into reality, right? So I was still waking up at 5:30 in the morning. I was still reading my scriptures every day. I would ask my mom to study with me because you do companionship study. I stayed in that same regiment for a long time. And I was real soft-spoken when I got home from the mission. I was real meek and I was just very different. I had changed a lot.
So it doesn't bring that alpha male out in you.
It's borderline, and I hesitate saying this, but borderline, you are brainwashed. I mean, you are deeply, deeply into this thing, and you're going through this repetition every day of reading certain scriptures, certain passages. You're constantly talking about the restoration of the gospel of Jesus Christ, which in our church, we believe that, Christ came to the earth. He brought his gospel. He brought the priesthood, the authority to act in the name of God. He died. The apostasy happened, which is Christ's gospel being lost off the face of the earth. And then it was brought back in the 1800s through a boy named Joseph Smith, 14 years old, who saw God in Jesus Christ, who was directed to golden plates on the side of a hill, who dug them up, who translated them using the gift of God. And we consider that record of Scripture just like the Old or New Testament, right? So these ideas, I knew this is all I knew my whole life, and this is what I went out and taught. This is what I preached.
So let me ask you a question. This 2 years that you're going door to door, you're sharing the gospel, you're telling people about Jesus and the Mormon religion.
Yeah.
Were there ever times that you questioned, like, did you ever find yourself riding down the road on your bike or waking up in the morning or whatever going, is this all real? Does this make sense? Did you ever question your own faith during that time?
Not even one time.
Not one time.
Nope.
Really?
No.
That's extraordinary.
I fully believe this.
Yeah, 24/7, 365 for 2 years.
Not even one time.
How about up until that 2-year mission, up until you were 19 years old, did you ever challenge your faith?
No.
Really?
Yeah. My parents were so in it, right? That everything we lived, breathed was that doctrine. And, even though I wasn't I was a pretty, I would say, disobedient kid when it came to the church, right? I wasn't great at following the rules.
Yeah.
I never questioned.
What do they call Mormons that don't follow the rules?
Jack Mormons.
Jack Mormons. Okay. Yeah. I thought I did. Yeah. Yeah. I've heard this term before. So what is just Jack Mormons means you're not following the rules.
You're Mormon, you're baptized, your name's on the record of the church, you have a membership, but you don't do the rules. You don't follow the rules.
So tell me more about this Mormon religion that you followed for, so many years. Were you able to stray as part of the Mormon religion? Could you make mistakes and stray away from the religion and still stay in good faith? What did that look like? Or was it, seems like a very structured religion.
We are called the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. We are very Christian. A lot of the world doesn't realize that. They're like, do they even believe in Jesus? It's like, yeah, he's like the center of that entire religion, right? So therefore, we believe in saving ordinances that Jesus taught, like baptism, receiving the gift of the Holy Ghost, the repentance process, okay? And so it was encouraged, like, hey, you're not going to be perfect, but when you're not perfect, there's a process that you can go through to become cleaned of your sins. And that includes personal prayer with God. That includes sitting down with an authority like a bishop and confessing those sins and then being essentially forgiven. Sometimes there was a reprimand, like you can't take the sacrament for a certain amount of times, depending on the sin. If the sin was bad enough, for example, if you committed adultery, you cheated on your wife, then you're probably going to get excommunicated from the church, meaning you're all the way out. And in order to get back, you actually have to go through the process again of being rebaptized and get the Holy Ghost again. And, there's saving temple ordinances. There's a lot, right? So the church very much encourages repentance and the repentance process and becoming clean, but it also requires a lot, right? And one of the areas where I went sideways, where I started to really question, was we have this idea in the church that's called the covenant path. And the covenant path is you're born onto the earth, and when you die, you want to go back and live with God and your family for eternity. Therefore, we've created a path for you. And if you just follow that path, then you'll have the opportunity to live with God and your families again. And that path is very rigid, okay? By the way, at what point in your life, Vic, did you say, I'm going to go there and it's going to be a perfectly straight line and I'm never going to deviate, and then once I get there, I'm going to celebrate and it's going to be great? Like it's not the way that things work.
Never once.
It doesn't work that way. No. So it's this weird concept of like, literally I have these visions that are hard coded into my brain from a time I was 6, 7, 8 years old of this path and like a checklist of things that if you do these things, then you can return to live with God again.
So through good works.
Through all through good works.
Did you feel a lot of love and compassion and empathy at your core?
No. But I thought that's the way I was supposed to feel.
Hmm.
Right. So
What was that like? What did that, I mean, if that isn't how you felt, did you feel more like you were on a mission?
the religion is so demanding and so hardcore that every Sunday I went to church for my entire life, I felt some level of discomfort around feeling guilty, like I wasn't enough or I wasn't behaving the way that I should, or
Hmm.
it's so incredibly rigid that there's no room for error. And if you're making error, there's not a lot of love around that. It's pretty harsh. And so I felt guilt for most of my life. And it was all because God didn't love me or didn't accept me because I wasn't obeying his commandments fully.
When did it start to change? Because it sounds like you've been on a different path. Help us kind of catch us up.
Yeah.
You get back from mission, you're, in your early 20s and you're still, living this life. At what,
Yeah.
did something happen that triggered a big change? Was there a life event? I know you're an avid motorcycle rider. Did you have some crazy crash and hit your head? Like, tell us what happened here.
So I get home from my mission. My wife I dated in high school. We get married 6 months after my mission. So I'm 20.
Did she go on a mission as well?
No, I'm 21. She's 19 when we get married.
Okay.
By the way, this is not out of the ordinary for LDS
Sure.
members of the church, right? I think I started having questions about things like the one true church doctrine. Okay. One thing we teach is you cannot return to live with God and your families in the highest degree of glory after this life unless you're baptized in our church, confirmed, a member of our church, received the gift of the Holy Ghost, the covenant path, right? It's part of it. It's being baptized in our church. I started to think through this concept, and I realized that there's been about 200 billion people on the earth, and there's been about 30 million confirmed members of the church. Which, do you know the math on that?
I mean, a super small percentage.
It's a small percentage of a small percentage of a small percentage.
Yeah.
Right? It's a tiny number. And I thought, if this is the same God that I know that loves me and that loves all of his children, would he really do that? Right? Would he really exclude 99.99999% of all of his children from having that opportunity to live with their families and him forever in the highest degree of glory? Once that became shaken, Vic, for me, then I started, then we had a life event with my wife that we can get into. That life event forced me to go really deep and say, what is this life all about?
Yeah. So walk us through that.
I'm 31 years old. I just sold my company to a public company.
Yeah.
I was an executive in this business, $4 billion market cap,
Yeah.
not a small company.
And you did really well through that transaction.
I did really well. I'm young, married 10 years, 3 kids, all healthy. I mean, look, I poked my head up and I was like, I can't believe that this is my life. I would wake up every day. I can't believe this is my life, right? You've shared some of these sentiments with me. I'm in February of 2022. This is 4 months post-acquisition. I'm in Dallas, this city, on business. I walk into my hotel. I jump on the elevator. As the elevator doors start to close, a man sticks his arm in the door and he jumps on the elevator with me. And I look at this man. He's probably late 50s. And I just say, hey, man, how you doing? And he looks me dead in the eyes and he says, I'm not doing well today. He said, I had to bury my 26-year-old son.
Mm.
And dude, I was kind of like, I was really caught off guard because 99% of those interactions, it's good, good, cool, see you later, right? It's like,
Wow.
And he said this to me, and I said, I didn't know what to say, and I just said, man, I'm really sorry that happened. And he said, he was a good kid. It was a total fluke accident. It shouldn't have happened. And we go up 10 floors as he's telling me this. The door's open. He looks at me, he says, man, I don't know if you have a family, if you have kids, but if you do, just hold them really tight and tell them you love them because you never know when it's going to be their last day. And I open my arms to hug this guy. We hug it out. He leaves, the door's closed, dude, and I just lose it. Right?
Yeah.
I go up 3 or 4 more floors. I get off the elevator. I go to my hotel room and I call my wife. I FaceTime her. Say, hey, I just had this experience and I wanted to share it with you. And I'm crying and she's crying. I just said, I'm so sorry I haven't been more there for you. You know, like I felt a lot of guilt in this moment. I said, I don't feel like I've been a great father, a great husband. And she's like, no, she's giving me a ton of grace, right? No, you've been awesome. You've just been working hard. And at this point, we just sold the company. Like we made it finally, right? No, you've been doing great. Exactly 1 month later, it's March 1st of 2022. I'm in New York City. I'm with the CEO of the parent company. We're at NASDAQ going live on CNBC. This is like every entrepreneur's dream is like being on Wall Street and being interviewed on CNBC, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So we're doing this whole deal. I wake up that morning from a call from my mother-in-law, and it's 5 a.m. Arizona time. And so when I see her phone ring, instead of picking up the phone and saying hello, I said, what happened? Because I knew something was wrong. In my heart, I saw that name come on the
Immediately.
phone and I just knew something was wrong. And she said, Brooklyn's in an emergency situation. She's in an ambulance going to the hospital. This is my wife. And she said, it's not looking good. You should probably get home. So I text my assistant and I said, hey, we were supposed to go live in like an hour. Like I was right across the street. I was getting ready to walk over there. I said, hey, I've got to get out of New York City, like ASAP. She's like, what about the thing? And I just said, something happened to my wife and I got to. So car comes, picks me up. I'm in the car. I'm getting text message updates from my father-in-law. And it's just got to the hospital. They just checked her in for triage. The next one is they found 2 liters of blood in her abdomen. They did an ultrasound. And at this point, I get to the airport. I'm standing in the airport. I get a text that's a picture of the whiteboard and the doctor in the hospital. And it says, ruptured ectopic pregnancy. And I don't know what this is. I go to Google, I research it, and I find out that in the majority of cases when this happens in the home, it's fatal. So, you know, I went from like, she might have got lightheaded, didn't eat, passed out, to with a lot of hope still, to like, my wife's going to die. And the next message is they just rushed her in for an emergency surgery. And for 4 hours, the updates were she's still in surgery, she's still in surgery, she's still in surgery. And as the plane's descending, I get a message from him that says something to the effect of, brace yourself. It doesn't look like she's going to make it. It's my father-in-law. My father-in-law, by the way, is Phoenix PD, 30 years, homicide detective. I mean, he's as hardcore of a man's man as they come, right? And I read this text as, she's gone, but I'm not going to tell you until you get here, right? And that's I had like every emotion happen, which was like, the first one was like, dude, I'm so sorry you had to tell me that. It's her dad.
Yeah.
I'm sorry you had to be there, not me. It was because of COVID restrictions. There could only be one person there, right? And I couldn't imagine what he was feeling in that moment. And then I went to, what am I going to do? Like, I have these 3 kids. Like, my wife's like, I don't even know how to do anything around the house, right? Like, what am I going to do? Am I ever going to love again? Like, have I been a good father? Have I been a good husband? I literally cycle through like the last 10 years of my life, and it's like a movie. It's like everything flashed before my eyes. I touch down, I run to the Uber, I get in the car, and at this point, I just have this hope that like, maybe he's telling the truth, and maybe she's still hanging on, and maybe I can be there to just like say goodbye. So I get to the hospital and I go up 2 floors and I walk into the room. And the first thing I realize is going on is that the heart rate monitor is still beeping. So I had this like, almost like this celebratory moment, like, awesome. Like, I get to just be here for one more moment, right? And, you know, the doctors had basically told us she's still alive, but she's not going to make it through this. She had lost too much blood. So I sit down at the bedside and I ask my father-in-law, I just said, "Hey, how are you? How are things? How's she doing?" And not even the moment that those words came out of my mouth, she had this intense kind of seizure-like reaction. And doctors had to come in, nurses, calm her down, the whole deal. It was super scary. It's like, is this the moment? Like, I just got here. She's going to like, I didn't know what was going on. They calm her down. We get through that night. I remember that night. I don't know if you've ever had a night where you actually didn't sleep even 1 minute. That was one of those nights. And I probably didn't even blink. I was so locked in on the heart rate monitor.
Yeah.
I was just waiting for it to flatline, and I was so scared, and I was holding her hand the whole night, and it didn't. And we got through to that next day. And then that one night turned into a second night, and then a third night, and a lot of miracles and a lot of God's hand in that process. And we got to the fourth day, and she starts coming to, and she's communicating. And I remember sitting down next to her and saying, "Hey," at some point I said, "Do you remember what happened when you had that seizure?" And she said, "Yeah, I was dying, and when I heard your voice."
Hmm. So you come in the room.
She said, "It gave me life."
Wow.
And we had I'd say we had a good relationship, but it was tough. I was I was building businesses, right? And I'd really lost sight of my connection, my relationship with my wife. And yeah, dude, after she said that, the way that it changed our relationship in such a big way,
Yeah.
right? And it just changed my whole outlook on life. Like, without that connection, really the message here is like, all that other stuff doesn't matter.
Right.
The money doesn't matter at the end of the day. The thing that matters the most is the depth and the meaning of our relationships. So
I think one of the biggest challenges that we all have is maintaining perspective that we gain from traumatic events. And I shouldn't say traumatic events
Totally.
because I think, I go to a wedding and the perspective I have there is extraordinary. I go to a baptism, I go to a funeral,
Yeah.
whatever it may be.
Yeah.
And you get this perspective, but holding on to it and living life with a blueprint of having that perspective and understanding that. It sounds like you have that. So Brooklyn's doing awesome now. Is she good?
Yeah, we lost that child that would have been our fourth, but we 6 months ago had our fourth again.
No,
So
that's awesome, man.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So, well, I'm sorry about the loss. I can't even imagine what that's like. I haven't experienced that. I'm glad Brooklyn's good and you've got the fourth, but let's kind of circle back to this walk in your faith because I mean, here you are, you've spent 30 years being just completely committed to your Mormon religion and the faith and the LDS church and everything. And something changed. So where are you at today? What are you, what's that look like?
It's tricky, right? It's really tricky. And I think the trickiest dynamic is when you go your whole life, incredibly orthodox or devout in any religion, and all of your family is that way. The hardest thing about distancing yourself from that belief is the family dynamic and pressure. So from my wife first, from my parents second, even though I'm a full grown man, it's like you still have that. My in-laws, right? Siblings, other people. That was the toughest dynamic for sure.
So just kind of backing up, what is your religious belief today? What is your faith today? Because it's obviously changed, and it sounds like your wife she's still a member of the LDS church, and she is a practicing Mormon. Is that accurate?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
And tell us about where you are.
Yeah. So I laugh because I'm very much in the middle of a journey of really trying to understand it all. And I think for the majority of my life, the thing that I was trying to find was truth. And I've somewhat given up on trying to find truth because I'm not sure that any religion, single religion, is going to provide the entire truth. And the thing that I'm trying to optimize for is my connection and relationship with God and how I feel when I'm doing spiritual practices, i.e., going to church or praying or meditative practices or breath work or whatever it is, right? And uh, so today I go to a non-denominational Christian church called Rock Point,
Yeah.
right? In the morning at 8:30 a.m. And then I go with my wife and my kids to the LDS church later that day. So I go to two churches every Sunday.
Wow.
And it's a lot. I still think that there's things about both churches that I like and that I appreciate. I just think that the one true church claim to me doesn't work. I don't believe that. I don't believe God would do that to his children. And I never felt great going to the church that I was raised in. And so the other one that I choose to go to now is one where I feel a lot more at peace and I feel a higher connection to God. And I feel like I know who Jesus Christ is finally. And I never really felt that when I was at the other church.
What's that feel like when you're singing and you're listening to that worship music? What's that like for you?
I get the chills just sitting here listening to you ask that question. I mean, it's in the LDS church, we were raised to believe that like that's bad. Like that kind of music in a worship service is like that's bad. That's not what God would have, right? It's like the first time I go and I listen to that, dude, I just get overwhelmed with emotion. I mean, that feeling when they're up there, the first 20 minutes of every service playing music, it's the best feeling of the entire week is that 20 minutes.
Yeah.
Genuinely.
It's the Holy Spirit, huh?
I mean, it is the Holy Spirit, dude, raining down on 500 people in the congregation. It's awesome. It's awesome.
It sounds to me like Jesus is working on your heart and that you're open.
Yeah.
And I have to imagine that it's a tough process, but you know, I'm being a Christian. I can tell you is God is faithful. I think that it's interesting. Do you feel like leaving the LDS church from a belief perspective and believing something different that your family and friends that are from the church have been accepting of that, or are they aware of it? Is this the first time you're ever talking about it? How are they receptive and kind of what are they asking? Are they like, Tyler, what's going on?
I think it depends on who it is, right? Like my wife, for example, was very, very much struggled with this for a long time. And a long time is maybe a year. And it actually, and I've been super open about this with my audience, like it put a strain on our marriage. It was tough. And that's how deep rooted the belief system is in the LDS church. Now we're at a really good place and a really great understanding. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that she has seen that I am the same man and maybe even better than I was having stepped away, right? So a lot of it's in my actions speak a lot louder than my words, right? My parents are the other group of people that are really, really struggle with this because there's a belief in the Mormon church that unless you stay on the covenant path, you won't be able to live with your families forever.
Yeah.
So now my parents believe like they're going to be there happily with the ones who stayed on the path, but the ones who didn't, like me, and my wife believed that for a while too. And I think now she's at a place where she realizes, I don't know that that's true. I think you will get to live with me and the kids forever because you're a good person. You have a good relationship with God. So
has she expressed any interest in visiting church with you?
So she,
I mean, you're going with her every Sunday. I mean,
right?
is there any chance that she's up at Adam early and wants to visit the Christian church?
She came one time, and
what'd she think?
Here's the deal, man. You've heard the old adage, you get what you're looking for, right? If you go with an open perspective and an open mind and an open heart, I believe that you'll gain a lot. And if you go closed off, then I don't think you're going to gain much at all. So
That's awesome. Well,
yeah.
timing is super important. So I've got a kind of a wrap up big question for you here.
Yeah.
What would you do that would be bold? What would be a big, bold move for you that would be just 10 times bigger than you're thinking now?
In the last 2 years since my last company, I haven't felt ready to go start my next venture. And so therefore, I'm doing some passion projects, Levels and the podcast and
Sure.
coaching CEOs and right. But these are really passion projects of mine. And then I'm on some boards and I have I'm sort of running a company like I talked to you about, but I haven't had the desire to go start my own thing again. That would be the thing, right? Like if I was going to go make a decision that was incredibly bold, it would be to go start another business from zero. And now knowing what I know, try to scale that thing to $1 billion plus, because I know it's possible and I know how to do it now. And it would be taking one more really big swing. So
Yeah.
that would be the thing.
Well, I love it. I'm obviously, I'm just a passionate entrepreneur, and there's nothing that I get more excited about from a professional side, and really just building a community than the power of building a business and doing a startup. So, I would just encourage you. I mean, you're young, you've got a, great family and a great mind, and you see the value in people. So, I challenge you next time we get together. I want to hear what you're going to be super bold and, go
I
do.
love that, man.
Doesn't mean that you can't keep coaching and doing everything else
Yeah.
you're doing. But, there's being a teacher is a beautiful thing, but obviously having the experience to stay relevant and teach people in a current mindset is super
Yeah.
powerful. And I think quite candidly, there's just not enough of it. But Tyler, I have loved talking with you. Your transparency and vulnerability and just your passion and your heart, both professionally and personally, but really just thinking about, where you are. You're a young man, and to have I think just the overall mindset that you have, if you can hold on to that, and that's a whole nother podcast, is what do you do to keep those important values and beliefs and principles front and center so you can do what you want to do. If you can hold on to that, man, I think that we're going to have some fun conversations, and I want to track your success. So I'm grateful for your friendship. Thanks for being here. Until next time, we're going to have to do a round two because we've got a lot more to cover.